Great Lakes Now is sponsored by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, nurturing environmentally healthy and culturally vibrant communities in metropolitan Detroit, and supporting initiatives to restore the Great Lakes Basin. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA leads a task force of 15 federal agencies and departments to implement the President's Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And by the International Joint Commission, assessing progress, providing advice, and engaging the public under the U.S.-Canada Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement.
Good morning. We are so happy that you are with us. Welcome to Great Lakes Now. I'm Christy McDonald. We are coming to you live this morning from Detroit, the campus of Wayne State University, the site of Great Lakes Week. It is day 2 of meetings between government and local agencies and environmental groups, all focused on the restoration of the Great Lakes. Now, the groups that we're talking about who are all meeting here this week in Detroit, the International Joint Commission, the EPA, the Great Lakes Commission, and Healing Our Waters. You know, millions of people in 8 states and 2 provinces of Canada live in the Great Lakes Basin. The lakes are 20% of the world's fresh water supply, but there are a lot of issues and problems really facing the Great Lakes, everything from algae blooms to invasive species to polluted beaches. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the concerns.
I remember going to the beach. I might have been 4 or 5 years old. I remember my dad, as we were walking, bending over to pick up trash, and nobody else would do it. They would just kind of walk by this stuff, this litter. And even at that age, wondering, why does he do this and why don't other people? Because it seems like we want to keep these beaches clean. Over the years, it's gotten me thinking about this is where this notion of individual responsibility and community care really starts. These little, nondescript actions that we take as people, and just when you think nobody's noticing, somebody does.
Invasive species, toxic sites, polluted runoff, overflows from sewage, overfishing, ecosystem breakdowns at massive scales. All these things have combined over time to damage the lake's ability to heal themselves.
More industries, more sewage plants, more highways. The accumulating impact of the human presence in the Great Lakes Basin.
You can die of 1,000 cuts.
That catches up with you eventually.
Every little cut doesn't seem to make a difference. It's accumulation of all of these 1,000 cuts.
We can't wait until we see these massive problems, or we'll never have the time to fix them. We have to fix the problems before we can see them.
There are several concerns facing the Great Lakes. The increase of aquatic invasive species like Asian carp, zebra and quagga mussels, an increase of harmful, sometimes toxic algae, the importance of keeping our lake shores clean and maintaining good water quality throughout the lakes. And for years, there has been a debate about how safe it is to eat some of the fish from the Great Lakes.
We had rivers like the Cuyahoga catching on fire, literally catching on fire. You could see those problems. Today, it's a little tougher to see them, so it's a little tougher to bend our heads and put our arms around to fix them.
I do believe that there's somewhat of a coming together, a focus on water right now.
In the last 5 years, the Great Lakes community has really pulled together. Virtually every citizen in the Great Lakes has pulled together to push for this Great Lakes Restoration Initiative.
Working together, you can get so much more accomplished than working individually. There's so many ways in which coming together we can create a much better product than working individually.
Many of these effects I'm not going to actually see because they'll occur long after I'm gone, but they are ones that concern me about, those generations coming down the road as to what kind of a legacy I want to leave to them.
When I take my kids to the beach and when I show up at work, one thing I try to do is I try to put myself in my kids' shoes and their kids' shoes as well to answer the question, have we done everything today? Are we doing everything today to set them up to inherit the Great Lakes the way they should be.
And there's going to be a lot of discussion about concerns today. We do have a full conference here today. In just a couple of minutes, we're going to go to our first session with the IJC and the EPA, along with Environmental Canada Regional Director, and they're going to be talking about the status of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which is going to be updated. The last time it was updated was back in 1987. Also coming up today for you, former Vice President Al Gore. He's going to be taking the stage at 1 o'clock this afternoon as the keynote speaker, expected to address climate change and the Great Lakes. So we're going to be broadcasting for you live all day long. We want to welcome people from our public television stations around the country who are watching our broadcast of Great Lakes Week. Thanks for watching. And also, if you're watching us online right now at greatlakesnow.org, we appreciate it. We're going to be broadcasting live until 5 o'clock this afternoon. And we want to make sure that we address some of your concerns. If you have any questions at all or issues that you'd like to discuss from your area of the Great Lakes Basin or anywhere around the country, make sure you get on our Facebook page at Great Lakes Now. You can also follow us on Twitter at Great Lakes Now as well. You know, one of the things when we talk about water quality and the health of our Great Lakes, you can determine it in a bunch of different ways, some very scientific ways, but sometimes, frankly, the easiest way you can look at the health of the water is to look at the fish that live there. We're going to take you to a conversation right now talking about trout in the Great Lakes.
To look at it in terms of, good old Clint Eastwood, my real hero, can kind of sort of see the good old days here. This is back in the 80s and 90s, and this is really what you expect to see in a trout, is that as the trout got older, the lipid content would get richer and richer. And trout were basically, in those days, they were the old couch potato. That's what they were doing. They were hanging around, getting fat, reproducing, having a good time. But during the 90s, you can see something was happening. By the time the fish were reaching about 6 years old or so, they were leveling off, and they were no longer increasing in their lipid content. Something about the food web had changed. Something's occurred in the Great Lakes that really is not helping these fish. And of course, we get into the ugly, and we can see basically where the slopes have changed dramatically. Basically, fish reach their maximum lipid content around about 4 to 5 years old, and it's down to about 15%. And so in many of our trout, we actually do see is that the lipid content has gone from around about 20% and to many fish down to about 5%. The system is really changing all around us. Well, it's just not the trout. The same type of data set can be generated for the smelt for over the same time period. You see here from back in the mid-90s that the levels of lipid and smelt have declined quite dramatically. And other aspects that were going on with smelt at this time and in the Great Lakes. This is some data from Russman and Riley from 2009, looking basically at the forage fish populations of Lake Huron. And, it doesn't take a statistician to realize they're collapsing and have collapsing and continue to collapse up until today. But it isn't just the numbers that are going down. When you actually look at a data set like this, actually the condition of the fish is declining. So it isn't just a matter that we've put maybe more salmon in and they've eaten some of the fish. This is a matter of saying something has actually changed the condition of the fish. Again, we're seeing a very stressed food web, and stressed food webs are very vulnerable to change. Another sort of means we're talking about using these environmental tracers is to look at bioenergetics and consumption. And really what we do need is have an in situ marker of consumption. And actually, we do have one. Some of those very large PCBs, as I mentioned, really become superb measurements of bioenergetic. Because as I say, even for yourselves, I can know your total body burden. I know basically all the foods you consume to actually achieve your body weight today at your age, because you can't really eliminate it at any particular appreciable rate. So the same thing occurs in fish, but even much better. And so we can actually see this lifetime dietary exposure occurs through food, and basically the lifetime history of an individual's energy acquisition and assimilation of energy and growth are all being tied up in a PCB measurement. So it starts as a simple trend program, starts becoming much more than a simple trend program, becomes one of the most valuable monitoring programs in the world today. Looking at the bioenergetics of individuals, we can see the trend is basically continuing through in the energetic density of trout, and this is some data from Mark Ryder, who's out in the audience here. And when he looks at his data set and looks at it in a bit more detail, what we start seeing is this huge amount of variability in the amount of, say, PCB 180 to the total energy within a fish. The fish are doing different things. And when populations get stressed, individuals start doing some strange things. We all recognize that. We see it in human populations as well. And so do fish. When they start running out of food, they'll start hunting around. Well, is this just happening in Lake Huron? No, not really. What we'll do is move forward. And this is basically a little model using the stable isotope of carbon. And you basically use a mixing model to interpret where the fish has been feeding using stable isotopes. Back in 1992, using Rick Kierlich's data set, you could basically see, well, back in 92, trout were doing what trout should be doing. You know, wouldn't catch a trout in the nearshore zone. They were all hanging out there in the deep open waters of Lake Ontario, basically doing what trout should do. They're a pelagic cold water fish. That's their habitat. That's how they make their living. But look at 2008. Look where the trout are now and where their diets are. Their diets have changed dramatically. And they're tracking a new type of food web. Have things changed? Absolutely, things have changed within the Great Lakes. And of course, this is affecting all our signatures in terms of how things are responding to nutrient control programs, contaminant programs, and other sorts of management programs such as habitat as well. So basically, the lake trout diet and bioenergetics have changed. The lake trout is a fantastic indicator of contaminants. It's also the effects of invasive species, effects of climate change, eutrophication, and that's really what it's doing. It's giving us this integration of multiple stressors, and the more we can learn to use this as an indicator, the more we're going to make wise decisions about the protection and conservation of the Great Lakes. And perhaps a suggestion for the report being developed, it really is a key indicator species. And perhaps it could be a good indicator species for the IJC to suggest to the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission, let's jointly work on this one fish as an indicator for managing fish stocks and for managing environmental quality in our system. Wouldn't that be a great way of promoting the ecosystem approach by having common indicators from different groups managing the Great Lakes in different manners? It can be done.
And you've been watching live coverage of Great Lakes Week right here on Detroit Public Television and on our public television stations around the country, and of course on greatlakesnow.org. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us as we start a very busy day 2 here of Great Lakes Week. Healing Our Waters, their sessions are going to be starting today as well. And the big headline today is that former Vice President Al Gore will be speaking here at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So make sure you either keep your TV on or keep your computers powered up so you can catch that, and we'll be broadcasting that live for you today. Joining me right now is Gary Wilson. He's a commentator for the Great Lakes Echo. And Gary, also been described by your own publication as curmudgeonly and cranky guy. But we're glad you're here with us today. He's kind of guiding us through Great Lakes Week a little bit. Cranky in a good way.
A good cranky.
Lovable cranky, right?
Yes.
But you're joining us, and we've been talking a lot. We talked yesterday about how everything got underway and what a great boon it was for everyone to actually be finally in the same place, talking about the same things, all of these different groups. But I want to talk about the former vice president coming here today and what signal that sends to the country.
I think it sends a big signal. You know, I have good friends on the East Coast in New York and the West Coast in California. And after all these years, we're still considered kind of the flyover area. And when I first started getting involved in Great Lakes issues, they go, "Oh, that's nice. You know, those polluted."
That's nice for you.
Yes, good. You know, those polluted lakes. But through the efforts of a lot of people, including everybody here, they've made a lot of progress. But they're still not quite on the national radar. And I think Al Gore lending his name to this conference and to these events will go a long way to saying, hey, gee, Al Gore is a big guy in environmental issues, and he took his time and lent his name to this conference and to these problems. That's a good thing.
And because we did talk briefly about the fact that there is not a governor presence here. We don't have any of the governors from any of the 8 states in the surrounding Great Lakes Basin here. But to have the former vice president who is out in front on climate change issues, wherever you fall on those issues, and putting his attention on the Great Lakes.
I think it's fantastic, and my message to the governors would be, gee, Al Gore is from Tennessee, and he found his way here, so where are the governors? No, I just think it's really good. And, you know, there are strong opinions in Al Gore. You know, We love him and we hate him all at the same time sometimes. But the fact that he's lent his name to this conference is just a huge positive for the conference and for Detroit.
I think we also can step back and we look at Great Lakes Week, and we know that there are the federal agencies here and the state agencies, the environmental groups that are all joining here together. And what can we do, I guess, to get more of the message out about what's happening in the Great Lakes, and so it's not that flyover. So people actually sit up and take notice and say, yeah, 20% of the world's fresh water is right here.
Yeah, you know, we have tremendous ambassadors for the region, and most of them are here at this conference. And they do a good job of spreading the word. There's a broader coalition that's just kind of forming, and it's called the Great Waters Coalition. All the regions around the country have the same problems that the Great Lakes do, and just in different forms. But this coalition, led by the National Wildlife Federation, is helping to put a spotlight on the Great Lakes. It includes Puget Sound in Washington, San Francisco Bay, Long Island Sound, the Everglades, the Chesapeake, who's actually been way out in front of all these issues, you know, beginning 20 years ago. So being part of that coalition, I think, will help the Great Lakes and the people here gain some national attention.
As we go into day 2 of these sessions, what should people at home who are just trying to get themselves up to speed on some of these issues, what should they be looking for?
Well, you know, Lisa Jackson, the EPA administrator, she spoke yesterday, and I was just reading over her comments a little earlier this morning. And she's really given cleaning up these toxic areas a high priority. But she said something else, and that was that they're really going to focus their efforts on these algae blooms and this agricultural runoff in Ohio. Now, she didn't provide a lot of specifics, so I put in a request to find out more about that. But that's a real positive. I would keep an eye on that.
And I want to talk in specifics about algae blooms in just a few minutes. But for some of you who are getting up to speed about the Great Lakes, a little bit of history about that, what I like to call a little Great Lakes 101, let's take a look. Watching the sunset from a lakeshore cottage, making the ultimate big catch, or cruising the waves to a hidden harbor town, the Great Lakes have made millions of people fall in love. 8 states in the province of Ontario, Canada share the beauty and astounding resources of Lake Superior, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, and Erie.
The Great Lakes, they consist of 20% of the surface fresh water for the entire planet, the entire world. 20%. 90% of the freshwater, surface freshwater for the entire country.
While many can relate to their allure and recreation, the lakes have an important connection to everyday life and business for millions around the country, starting off with the freshwater that makes its way into homes around the Great Lakes Basin. The lakes provide drinking water for 40 million people, over 50 billion gallons each day for municipal, agricultural, and industrial use.
In the last 5 years, there's been a much greater emphasis on the advantages that we have in the Great Lakes region with this freshwater supply. There's no question that a thriving blue economy requires a healthy water infrastructure.
People have always been attracted to water, and it's a place we look to reconnect to the place we call home. It's a place we go for rest and relaxation, and it's a place we go to for renewal. Water is something that has always been important to people.
The Great Lakes are also used as watery freeways of commerce. The 1,600-mile navigation system extends from Duluth, Minnesota to Ogdensburg, New York. Freighters, or Lakers as they're called, ship an average of 163 million tons of goods, anything from iron ore to grain.
The industries that rely on the Great Lakes for clean, fresh water, the auto industry, the steel industry, the chemical industry. All these industries need large quantities of water that are clean. The charter fishermen, marina owners, they're people who manufacture boats, the fishing equipment, hunting equipment. These are folks that actually rely directly on the lakes for their livelihood.
We are standing in the walleye capital of the world. That means $1 million to the local economy every spring.
But there are restrictions on how the Great Lakes can be used and controlled. Back in 1909, the International Joint Commission was created with the Boundary Waters Treaty. The IJC is made up of representatives from the United States and Canada. Its role is to settle disputes relating to the use and the quality of the lakes. And the quality and the health of the lakes are a major concern because of the impact on tourism and fishing. More than 1.5 million jobs are directly connected to the Great Lakes, generating $62 billion in wages.
Water has been hugely valuable, not the least of which the tremendous amount of recreation opportunities that it provides, and it's coming together to support what really is such a valuable commodity for our community.
And you are watching Great Lakes Week on greatlakesnow.org and on Detroit Public Television and television stations around the country. We're going to take you now inside the auditorium as they kick off the first session of the morning with the IJC and the EPA.
And now I would like to invite the U.S. Section Chair, Lana Pollock, to share her observations on the day. Chair Pollock.
My first observation is that people being people, they cluster to the back. And I want to tell you that these people are so attractive that if you would please just move down, you would not be disappointed. So if we could get even anybody to volunteer to move down, there will be a special prize for those who start so that we could feel like we're a group. Ah, special prize to the woman from Toronto. It might take me a day or two to get the prize all, purchased and wrapped up. And for those who are in the back, there's something else. You heard of that lump of coal. All right, it is a great day. My observation is that it's a great day in spite of the Tigers' loss. It was a great season, and we have to count our blessings. So welcome to this session. We open the morning with a very important session, which is a look at the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement negotiations, the progress therein. Everybody in this room knows how important it is to get that right, to help guide, direct, and really insist on a new transparency, a new commitment based on the considerable accumulation of knowledge and the new threats since the last rewriting of this agreement in '87. But before I introduce our speakers, our program, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to, in particular, thank the Assistant Secretary for Conservation and Management and the Department of Interior, Dr. Larry Robinson, who is here and who has commented to me what a great city Detroit is, and that people ought to know what's going on here, and we're coming back. So thank you, Dr. Robinson. I'd also like to, at this point, ask, and I know most are not in the room, but would the staff of the IJC please rise? We would like to, most of them are out working. Thank you. Meetings of this complexity don't just happen. You all know that. There's an incredible amount of work and thought in the work between the offices of our Windsor office, of course, in Ottawa and in DC as well. We thank the staff. I would particularly like to thank, and I don't know that he's in this room, there's one man who really looks like he's exhausted, and that's the guy we thank the most, and that's John Nevin. Is John here? Okay. Well, we can get started with Susan Hedman, who is the director of Region 5 for the EPA, and since she's been on that job, she has taken the responsibility for being the primary negotiator with the United States team. And Mike Goffin, the Acting Director General of Environment Canada, on the Canadian side, has been with these negotiations since the beginning. So thank you, Susan, and thank you, Mike. Thank you, and good morning.
this mic on? Yes. Okay. All right, there we go. During the meeting this morning, we will be providing a brief overview of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, the context for current negotiations, and the role that stakeholders and the public have played in the process. And then we'll be providing some further information on the directions that are currently being considered under the agreement. And I would like to say to the commissioners who are in attendance that we are in receipt of your September 29th letter, and we found it very helpful. We will not be specifically addressing the letter in the presentation this morning, but hope to do so next week when we meet with you in Ottawa.
The current Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement has guided our environmental protection efforts now for 38 years. The agreement's purpose is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the waters of the Great Lakes Basin ecosystem. The agreement is the Government of Canada and the Government of the United States' commitment to implement programs to manage nutrients and toxic chemicals that impact the Great Lakes Basin ecosystem. And it establishes areas of concern and lake-wide management programs. Under the agreement, there is a requirement for a periodic binational review, and since 1972, the agreement has been updated several times. Given that the Water Quality Agreement was last amended in 1987, it's not surprising that both countries recognized the importance for reviewing the agreement, and in January 2004 launched a binational review process.
This review was completed in 2007 with a comprehensive public review of the operation and effectiveness of the current agreement. The key findings of the review indicated that the purpose of the agreement remained valid, but was not reflected well across all of the annexes, that many of the provisions were outdated, that there were some pressing issues and emerging threats that weren't captured in the current agreement, that the roles of governments and the public were not clear, and that accountability was weak. The findings of the review process led our two federal governments to make an announcement on June 13th, 2009 about our joint decision to negotiate changes to the agreement.
We've approached negotiations in a phased manner, and we've now almost completed the fourth phase of the project, where we're drafting amendments to agreement text. Negotiations have been organized around a series of plenary sessions. A plenary is an official meeting of the parties. The negotiations officially commenced on January 27, 2010, with the first plenary in Washington, D.C. It focused on the process for negotiations and the issue of governance. The second plenary was held on April 8, 2010. At that meeting, chief negotiators worked with expert issue leads to examine the specific environmental issues under the agreement. Between the second and third plenaries, we had several working sessions where chief negotiators met to identify, develop, and discuss possible policy options. The third plenary was held on June 16th and 17th to agree upon the key policy directions needed for an amended agreement. With the conclusion of the third plenary, the binational drafting process began. We've tentatively scheduled a fourth and final plenary in early December of this year. Before we move to a summary of the directions for an amended agreement, we want to review and acknowledge the role of stakeholders and the public in reaching this point. As was mentioned earlier, in 2004, both countries engaged in an extensive public review of the agreement over a number of years. In 2005, the governments of Canada and the United States asked the International Joint Commission to seek the public's views on how well the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement had worked so far and how effective it had been. Then in 2006 and 2007, the governments established 9 multi-stakeholder working groups to review in detail the agreement. As part of this engagement process, a special governance and institutions workshop was held.
Once the decision was made to actually begin negotiations, both governments recognized the importance of engaging in broad public outreach throughout the negotiation process, and therefore designed a binational engagement process. This included a webinar prior to commencement of negotiations on the negotiation process itself and governance, a series of webinars in June 2010 to solicit comments on issue areas being negotiated, a series of binational teleconferences with issue leads from the U.S. and Canada in September 2010, two binational public and a webinar to seek reviews, two binational public fora and a webinar to seek reviews on the significant changes being proposed for the agreement in September 2011. Those were the meetings that were just held in Toronto and Chicago. And additional domestic processes that have been carried out by both countries to engage groups who work on Great Lakes restoration, businesses and organizations with interests in the lakes. For instance, water, agriculture, recreation, shipping, fisheries, chemicals, oil and gas, and forestry, and non-governmental organizations, municipalities, academia, property owners, tribes, and others. We'll now turn to an overview of the directions being proposed for a revised agreement. We will be presenting these directions under the following headings: what is being retained, what is being streamlined, what is being improved, enhanced, and what is being added. Please keep in mind that what we're presenting to you today reflects the current status of negotiations for the amended agreement. Drafting is not complete, and these amendments will require official approval of the governments.
The core of the current agreement is still sound, and the two governments propose retaining a great many concepts. Most significantly, we propose retaining the purpose of the agreement, the current agreement scope, which includes the 5 Great Lakes, the connecting river channels, and the international section of the St. Lawrence River. The commitments in the agreement to restoration of ecosystem health in areas of concern, and the commitment to lake-wide management plans.
In our negotiations, we propose to streamline the agreement in several ways. With regard to lake-wide area management plans and remedial action plans, we propose to require more frequent, targeted reporting and increasing the emphasis on action and implementation. We propose to streamline definitions throughout the agreement by including only necessary definitions, updating and clarifying definitions where required, and eliminating redundancy. Perhaps most significantly, we propose to consolidate several existing annexes and references into one place for each of the following topics: ship source discharges, nutrients, chemical substances of concern, the International Joint Commission, and perhaps others.
Parties are considering improvements to governance, including clarifying the scope to explicitly embrace an ecosystem approach to water quality, revising the general objectives to include health of the ecosystem, establishing ecosystem objectives that are specific to each lake, and a commitment to assessing Great Lakes science and integrating development of binational science priorities into the management process. Lake-wide management plans will be improved and enhanced by addressing all environmental stressors, not just critical pollutants, and by development of a nearshore assessment and management approach. Canada and the United States are considering improvements to the Binational Management Forum. We propose to improve and enhance the role of stakeholders and the public in the new agreement. And the parties are considering improving and enhancing accountability in the agreement through enhanced reporting across all annexes and a commitment to prepare a binational progress report of the parties no less frequently than once every 3 years.
Perhaps most importantly to you here, the parties propose to strengthen and clarify the role of the IJC. This would include an enhanced role in analyzing and disseminating information to raise public awareness, as well as the level of public participation in restoring and protecting the waters of the Great Lakes. It would also include an enhanced role in recommending approaches and options for the parties to consider in order to improve their effectiveness in achieving the objectives of the agreement, as well as reporting to the parties, other governments, and the public with their assessment of progress toward achieving the objectives of the agreement.
It will also include tendering advice and recommendations to the parties and other governments on current and emerging problems related to the quality of the waters of the Great Lakes, and making the advice and recommendations available to the broader audience. Providing advice on matters related to research and monitoring of the waters of the Great Lakes and disseminating that information to the public. Regularly engaging the public on issues affecting the waters of the Great Lakes and options for restoring and protecting these waters, and making special reports to the parties, other governments, and the public concerning any water quality problem in the Great Lakes as required.
Other areas in which we propose to improve current elements of the agreement are related to the Annex on Chemical Substances. The treatment of chemical substances in the agreement would be improved through a new consolidated chemical substances specific annex that would clearly identify commitments to reduce risks and protect the Great Lakes from these substances. This new annex would also address pharmaceuticals and personal care products and other chemicals of emerging concern. There will also propose to be an annex on nutrients to improve and enhance the treatment of nutrients in the revised agreement. Parties hope to consolidate current references to nutrients into a single annex. The annex would continue to focus on phosphorus control, but enhance the coordination of binational actions to manage phosphorus concentrations and loading so that cladifera, cyanobacteria, and other algal species do not impair aquatic ecosystem health in nearshore or open waters of the Great Lakes. Annex on groundwater would better reflect the broader challenges and future impacts facing the waters of the Great Lakes related to groundwater, including information gaps and science needs. We are considering an updated annex on groundwater. The annex on ship source discharges would be improved so that the treatment of ship source discharges in the agreement would be enhanced. Parties are considering amending the ship source annexes by folding them into a single annex focused on ship source discharges that could affect the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the Great Lakes. And finally, a new science annex. In order to improve the treatment of science in the agreement, we are considering creating a new science annex that encompasses all of the existing annexes that reference science. This new annex would recognize science as the cornerstone of the agreement and would organize efforts through an adaptive management framework.
In addition to strengthening and streamlining the annexes in the current agreement, there are some new additions. For example, a new annex on aquatic invasive species, committing both countries to pursue a binational prevention-based approach for aquatic invasive species, informed by risk assessment, so that new introductions are prevented and the spread of aquatic invasive species already present is controlled or reduced, with the goal of ultimately resulting in no new introductions. A new annex on climate change impacts is proposed, committing both countries to consider the impacts of climate change in the development of approaches for the achievement of the agreement's purpose and objectives. A new annex on habitats and species is proposed, committing both countries to establish a target of net habitat gain with a goal of conservation, protection, maintenance, restoration, and enhancement of the resilience of native species, habitats, and ecosystems. And finally, a new notification component is proposed, committing both countries to strengthen notification for planned facilities or activities that could have environmental effects on the waters of the Great Lakes. On behalf of Susan and myself, I'd like to thank you for attending this presentation and invite you to visit the binational.net website for further details on the proposed amendments to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan and Mike, for the detailed presentation on the Water Quality Agreement. So just a few housekeeping items this morning. As you can imagine, we're going to have quite a large crowd this afternoon with former Vice President Al Gore at 1:15. So to make sure that you have a great seat in the house, please make sure that you have your name tag. And we'll begin seating folks at about 12:30 out in front of the auditorium today. I hope that you're going to be able to join us for the Great Lakes Luncheon this afternoon with Foreign Affairs Parliamentary Secretary Bob Deckert. A section of seats will be reserved so that you will have time to finish your lunches before we come to the auditorium. And I'm also told that there's a few seats remaining, so if you're interested in joining us for lunch, it's just $20. You can visit the registration desk and reserve your seat. If you remember yesterday, Faye Nelson's presentation about the Detroit Riverwalk Conservancy was just phenomenal. It's been a great pleasure to be staying right on the riverfront, and there will be a wonderful tour this afternoon. It's been very popular. We actually have more people registered than we have room for, so we really need you to confirm your participation at the registration desk. So if you're planning on joining the Detroit River Conservancy tour this afternoon, please check out the registration desk and make sure that you confirm your registration so you can join us. The buses for the tour will leave at the bus stop just west of McGregor at 5:10 this afternoon to go right over to the riverfront. And if you're going to be joining the Areas of Concern Conference boat trip this afternoon, this dinner cruise, which I'm looking forward to, that tour will end up at the Detroit Princess. But if you aren't joining us on the boat cruise, the buses will take you right back to the hotel. And that's the good news. And I'm looking forward to the next part of this morning's program. We are going to break into our workshop sessions where we get to dig down into the weeds on the key priority areas and really look forward to hearing from you. So you'll walk through the breezeway to McGregor in rooms F, G, and H. That's where the chemicals of emerging concern, health effects, and ecological effects will be discussed in detail. And also beaches. The discussion on our beach quality will be in McGregor J. And if you need to know more about that green goo, the harmful algae discussion will be in the Alumni House. And I look forward to seeing you in the workshops. Thanks so much.
And you have been watching our live coverage of Great Lakes Week right here on Detroit Public Television and at greatlakesnow.org. We thank you so much for joining us this morning. As we mentioned that there are several conferences going on at once, federal, state, environmental groups all meeting for the very first time here in Detroit to talk about issues that are facing the Great Lakes. So we're going to take you now from Wayne State University in Detroit, go across town a little bit over on the other side of Detroit to the Westin Book Cadillac Hotel, where the Conference for Healing Our Waters has begun today. And giving that keynote speech is Bill Rustem, and he is a director of strategy with Governor Rick Snyder's office. And Governor Rick Snyder, of course, the governor here in the state of Michigan. Again, we have a full day of conferences here at Wayne State and also now starting over at the Westin Hotel in Detroit as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that keynote speech.
It's a great thing.